Hi everyone, it's Chris. Today I have a no-line coloring video for you. I am using this beautiful new floral image. This is from a stamp set called Tropical Blooms, and it is part of the new Gina K Hearts and Flowers Stamp TV kit. And I'm using this large image in my original MISTI. I am stamping with Versamark ink. I'm going to stamp multiple times because I want just a very faint image that I can do my no-line coloring from. I actually stamped it 4 times to get enough ink saturated into this paper so I could see it well enough, but yet it wasn't going to show through any of my coloring. Now I am using the Artist Choice cardstock from Gina K Designs, which is great for both Copic markers and colored pencils. And today I'm going to be using both. So this is a great cardstock. I am using Copics first, and I'm going to do sort of like an underpainting for my colored pencils. And I'm starting with my dark colors. I am making my roses, I believe they're called global roses or friendship roses. They're the yellow roses with the red tips. And so I'm starting with the red tips on each of those petals. By putting this dark color in on those edge of the petals, it's easier for me to define this very faint image. So I'm starting with R24, and then I'm working to my lighter colors, but I'm not worrying too much about blending out the transition between colors. So first I did the very tips of each of the petals with R24, and then I am working downwards. So I went to R22, which is kind of a peachy red, and then working into more of an orange yellow, which is actually YR14 was the color I used. And now I'm adding Y35, and Y32 is going to be my lightest color. And I'm blending these colors together very minimally. I'm not worried about lines or transitions right now because my colored pencil is going to do most of that work for me. But by putting down this kind of underlayment of color, the colored pencil part goes really, really quickly. So here I'm just kind of working a little more yellow in. I went back with the YR14 and I added just a little bit of shading underneath a couple of these petals. I didn't put a ton of light source or shadowing in my flowers because my light source is kind of going to come just from straight above, but I did want to have a little bit of shadowing on a couple of those petals that I needed to show a little bit of depth on those lower petals of that large rose. I did add a little shading. And then I just continued. I did the smaller bloom and then the little bud the same way. Now I'm working on the greens. I just chose 3 green markers. I'm using YG 61, 63, and 67. Now in this instance, I started with the lightest color rather than the dark. And now I'm kind of just adding more color. I am shading like the stem underneath that large bloom and those 2 leaves that I felt were probably going to be covered up, kind of in that cast shadow of that large flower. And you'll notice that when you do the leaves, especially with the green, I didn't notice it quite so much with the yellow and the red, but that Versamark almost acts like a little bit of a resist. So I'm able to see the veining of those leaves. So I tried to work with that and kind of flick the color in without covering up too much of that, because I like that look where that was kind of peeking through. Now that I have that base color down on my image, I'm going to my colored pencils. You can use any colored pencils to do this right over the top of your Copic markers, but today I am using the Faber-Castell Polychromos markers. I do like how vivid the colors are. They're quite intense, and they really can give some definition over the top of Copic markers. So I am coloring in the same color order as I put the colors in on. So I'm starting with a very dark red, and I just pretty much drew a nice crisp line on the edge of each of those petals to define that outer edge. And then I'm working towards the lighter colors. I used that dark red and then more of a rust color, almost an orangey red. Now, I've decided that I needed a little definition to just kind of separate those lower petals. So I'm adding a little bit of extra shading here to the base of these flowers. And between these petals, I want to make a little bit of kind of that appearance that the petals are overlapping and kind of jutting out into space a little bit. So I put a little bit of that mid-tone, kind of an orangey brown underneath. And now I'm going over with more of a golden orange and then the brighter yellow, filling in all of those little spaces and making sure that I don't have any white areas showing through. And this kind of smooths out all of my transitions that I had with my Copic markers. Now I'm going to do the same thing with the greenery. These leaves, I noticed that as I put that kind of underpainting of Copic marker, that especially on the veining of the leaves, the Versamark almost acted like a resist. So that veining kind of showed through as slightly lighter. So now I can go over with my pencil and work with that veining and create a little bit more shape to each of those leaves. On the greens, I worked pretty much light to dark, again, just like I did with the Copic. Now that my coloring is done, I'm going to use the die to die cut the image and start assembling my card. I'm using some of this new Thermoweb purple tape that I got a little sample of when I was in Phoenix for Creativation. And man, do I like this stuff. It is really sticky, but yet it does not damage your image or tear your paper at all. I am really excited about this. It really holds your dies in place. So it's pretty awesome stuff. Now I'm going to also die cut one of these word dies from the kit. I used a 1/4 sheet of red cherry cardstock and I die cut right out of the very center of it, and I'll show you why in just a bit. I'm using the negative to line up the image. I stamped first on the kind of just the grid paper inside my MISTI, and I'm using that negative to line up where my die cut should go. And now I'm going to stamp in Versamark and emboss with white. And then I'm going to use that negative, that full 1/4 sheet of paper, as the mat for my image as I assemble my card. So nobody's going to know that I die cut right out of the center. Now my embossing is done, and I want just a tiny sentiment strip for the remainder of the greeting. I want it to say thinking of you. So I'm using my MISTI Creative Corners to hold that tiny little strip of paper in place. So I can just kind of adjust my paper to match up right underneath my stamp, double check to make sure it is lined up, and stamp right within that channel. I'm just going to snip this off to a smaller piece and start assembling my card. I have my red cherry cardstock. I also have a piece of really pretty linen paper. This is a patterned paper from Gina K Designs as well. And then I'm just going to lay out my images and glue them down. You can see that my image hangs over the front of my top fold card panel. So I'm just going to use my paper trimmer and just kind of slice that off. And there's my finished card. Thanks for watching.